for the Branford Forum. We'll wait another couple of minutes for stragglers to come in, and then we'll get started with our program today.
Okay. 39 participants. This is great. 40.
So the host is in the top center next to my thing. You moved his band around, waving.
For purposes of clarity, we will ask everyone to stay muted unless they're speaking, asking a question, and so forth. Okay, well, I think it would be a good time to start now. Thank you all for coming to the Branford Forum. It's a very exciting program we have today. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Jordan and Jenna Anthony and our colleagues at the Blackstone Library in Branford for hosting this and all of our other programs. So we really appreciate their support. Next week, we're hosting Julie Wagner, who's the president of the Branford Land Trust, and she will be speaking live at the library here in Branford. So we understand if you're in Israel or California or someplace that you're excused for not coming to that program. We will be recording today's session. So if you don't want to appear on camera, you can hide yourself. And if you don't want to be heard, you can stay muted. But otherwise, we love to have your participation. As I mentioned, please stay muted during the session. We'll have time afterwards for Q&A. You can you can ask questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask your questions verbally. We ask, of course, that your questions be succinct and pertinent, of course, but we really welcome everybody's input and interest. So without further ado, I'm going to start my recording as well. So welcome, everyone. This is Dan Rabin, and thank you for joining us at the Branford Forum today. We have a fantastic program in store for you. Naftali Kaminski, who is a world-renowned pulmonologist and professor of medicine at Yale, has convened a panel of experts on Israeli politics and culture. And he will be moderating the presentation, and then we will open it up for Q&A at the end. So Naftali, thank you so much. And please unmute yourself and take it from there.
Thank you, Daniel, and thanks all of the Branford Forum for providing us the opportunity to speak about this. I always say, I deal with really, really bad diseases, and I wish that I had to deal only with diseases and not with things that the damage that people cause each other. But unfortunately, decisions of governments, government officials or policymakers have sometimes a bigger impact than any of drug that I can discover in the future. We have several speakers, and I'll panelists, and I'll sort of introduce them, but I actually would like to ask Michal Bar-Asher Siegal, an Israeli Talmud scholar who's now at New Haven at Yale, to sort of open today's presentation. So Michal?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. So when we discussed so for lesson, let me introduce myself in a few words, and then I'm gonna say what I have to say. So I'm a professor of Talmud. I do Jewish studies in Israel, and this is a field that's very limited to women. So being a women's female scholar in this field and looking at rabbinic sources is a privilege, and it's been a struggle, but it's a lot of fun and wonderful. The problem is the vantage point to look at some of the changes that the proposed government wishes to do, the expansion based on rules of the Jewish law that I know very up close and personal, and that scares me very, very much. I'm studying this text as a historian, looking back at text that's 1,500 years old, and I'm very worried about the possibility of making them alive again in the state of Israel, and that's part of my history. But when I thought of what to speak today, I thought to turn in a different direction than my fellow speakers today, and I wanted to give you a glimpse of what it is to live in Israel now. I don't live in Israel. I live here in the States. We're in a sabbatical here, but we visit often and we live via WhatsApp in Israel. And I wanted to show you a snapshot of what it is to live in Israel and what the ramification of it. And I think it kind of gives a glimpse of the danger, the catastrophe that's looming ahead. So let me share my screen. Host disable participant screen sharing. I can't share my screen. Daniel, can you allow me to share? Good, thank you. So I wanted to basically talk to you about what it means to be an Israeli today. And I was thinking for the past few days, how can I do it? How can I explain to you what it is to live with a right-wing government that tries to make such fundamental changes to the contract that we signed off as being Zionists living in Israel? And I thought that I'll do that by showing you my WhatsApp feed. And the way to do that, WhatsApp is a social network by which we keep in touch with our friends in Israel, and this is the groups in Israel. And one group in specific that I chose to do that, which I think is kind of representative of what happened, is a group of academics. We met at the Young Academy of Sciences in Israel and became very, very close friends. We've been friends for the past, few years. We're very close. There isn't a day passes that we don't communicate on the group. And there's a female physicist there, a female brain surgeon, scholar, a female computer scientist, a male biologist, and me. And we are on that group daily, talking about our friends, talking about our kids, our family, our life, our academic struggles. We're all academics in Israel, all liberal. A few of us are religious. A few of us grew up religious or not. A few of us are from Tel Aviv. A few of us are from Kfar Saba. We are very diverse in fields of study. I'm the representative of humanities, but there's some social sciences there, and there's biology, and there's exact sciences. So kind of a spread of academic life. And what I wanted to show you, and this is just, I went into the media of one of my of the group, and I wanted to show you. I love pictures, by the way, of carbs. So my friends send me pictures of carbs when they make them. So there's a lot of pictures of cars, but and also, I don't know if you can see, there's a picture of my kid's birthday party and my friend's birthday party. There's a picture of me showing a manuscript to my kids. I don't know if you saw the manuscript Sassoon that's being sold now. I had access to it firsthand, and I managed to show it to my kids, which was very exciting. And even a guitar that George Harrison played on. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that people, in a daily life do. But look what happens in between. And this is my life. I have a friend who was arrested, a professor of philosophy, David Enoch from Hebrew University, that was arrested. So there's a picture of him being, taken to the police station. There's a picture of my friend Shiri, who is a mathematician at Tel Aviv, wearing the red garb of the women from this apocalyptic show, and her son, who uses drums and got to being on the head of the Israeli newspaper because he was playing the drums in one of the demonstration. So this is my life. This is how our life in Israel looks, right? I wake up in the morning, the time gap. I got a lot of messages in my WhatsApp group, and this is what it's a snapshot of what it looks. Pictures from demonstrations, side by side, daily life. This takes over every being of our existence. And then I looked at some of the topics that we discussed in recent months in this group. And the first thing what we did, by the way, this is my friend Michal, one of the picture, her son from behind. He's religious. They're religious. They raise their kids religious. And for the first time ever, I know all my friends are die-hard Zionists. We are all never considered living Israel. They do science. All my friends in the could do science in situation. They're the best minds Israel has to offer in exact sciences. This is the Young Academy of Sciences. This is the top tier of Israel. Never considered leaving, even though a physicist or a biologist can do what they do much better in other universities, and they had offers, but they chose to live in Israel. And for the first time in my life, there were conversation about living Israel. Should we stay? Should we not? The hardest one was that some of us wrote, we make that decision to stay, but can we still justify that decision to anyone else? Well, right, we choose to be Israeli, but can we justify that decision when we have to talk to others? What does it mean to choose to be Israel, to choose to live in Israel? The reasons for that becomes less and less evident. And then the conversation, moved towards our kids. This is a group that we send pictures of our kids having birthdays, and one of the members of the group we just found out his wife is pregnant with the third child, and we're all very happy about this. But then we have to start ourselves, and I can't even describe how uncharacteristic this is to find in the top tier of academics in Israel. This kind of conversation when we're making that choice, are we making a moral choice, an ethical choice towards our kids? Does this, is this justified? Are we okay to make that decision from them, knowing what Israel is about to be? A fascist country, a religious country? Is this something that we're willing to let our kids live in Israel? Most scarily, what's happening in Israel raises to the floor the question of religion in Israel and what it does. And you'll hear from the next speakers a lot about the details. What does that mean to make Israel abide by more religious laws? And what does it mean to let religious leaders lead the country in a much more substantial way, or let Jewish law dictate a lot of the things in Israel? You'll hear what the meaning of that is, and what does that mean to take away the restraints or the possibility to do so. But more than that, it's all of a sudden the realization of a lot of them, people in the group, which are not religious at all, not like me, that I deal with the sources every day, that they finally realize that something happened, that we are all waking up to the fact that our religion, our culture, has a lot of problems in it. And there's a lot of ramification to it. I'm sending you a picture that we passed in the group of something that happened. And I think Yair is going to talk a little bit about that. It talks about, this is a manifestation of a kuzari, a book that was written in Middle Ages that rate things in nature from, how do you say domim? From, I'm missing the word in English.
Substance.
Can't hear you, Elitzur.
Similarities.
Okay, so this is what Elitzur lo shomim otcha tov. And there's things that grow and things that talk and things, and then on the top is the Jew, right? There's like everyone else, and then the Jew on the top of that. So this is from an Israeli school that teaches Kuzari. This is something that's in medieval Jewish literature. What does that mean that our kids learn this? And what does that mean that this will become more and more something in our nation? And I have to say, some of the people in the group who are not religious, all of a sudden are aware of the fact that this is something that we need to start considering. What does that mean to start teaching our kids the Jewish religion? And the other side of it is that we choose to live in Israel according to the Jewish holidays and according to the Jewish calendar. But what does that mean? What's the content of that? And when the government shifts the content of those Jewish holidays into a religious mindset that contains certain agendas, what does that mean to us? And that's scary. It's scary to the group, and it's something that we have to consider. And of course, the thing that looms all the time when we talk about our kids is the army. We are a country that fights for its existence, and we don't forget it for a second. We see very, very scary signs that what's happening in Israel is weakening our position in the world and allowing some of our worst enemies of the state of Israel to gather forces against us. That's something that is very apparent, and the Israeli army is not something to be dismissed. But are you willing to die? Are you willing to sacrifice, let's start with that, a few years of your life? But are you actually willing to put your life at risk for a country that has an agenda and has values that are very, very different from liberal ones? That is said again and again very explicitly that they do not mind letting go of the basic liberal rights of a society. So do you send your kids to such an army? You're the most precious thing of the world. And I have to tell you, this is the conversation that I never thought that I would have with our friends. And this is happening, very, very, very real. And lastly, financial issues. We're all, we need to eat, we need to feed our children. And what's happening in Israel brings Israel to the brink of a financial disaster. And for the first time in my life, we're having a concrete conversation about where do we take our pension? Do we keep it in Israel? What will happen to us? What will happen to our assets? And you see people pulling their money out of Israel and putting them in American funds or American accounts or American pension, and whoever can. If you can't, what do you do when thinking about this? This is just a few glimpses of what we've been talking about, and I wanted to just kind of bring you a snapshot of my close friends group. And I'm gonna finish here, but I think I wanna dedicate the last minute to just say how saddening and scary what I just showed you. This is not something that I expected ever to happen in my lifetime, that people who are very hardcore Israelis who believe in this country, who chose to live in this country, and feel very, very scared about their decision to stay in Israel. And that decision is no longer something obvious. That decision is no longer obvious as the right decision for our kids. And the ramification of it for this elite group of academics, right, who are leading the field in research, who are leading the field in academia, who feel very, very part of the Israeli society, starting to think differently and raising issues differently. And this is very, very real and very, very sad. I'm going to stop here and gonna bring it back to Naftali.
So thank you, Michal. When we discussed this, Michal says, I'm going to start because I have the lightest part of the thing. So it only gets worse from now. And yeah, so I'm going to give like a, how would you say, a triggering thing. So again, this is the panel discussion, and we're going to speak. And as an Israeli who made the decision, can you see my screen? So as an Israeli who made the decision to leave 20 years ago with my family because of multiple reasons, I must admit that I sort of gave up a little bit on Israel. And I took some good things for granted. I took some bad things for granted. But I never thought of the option of destruction of the state. And I think for me, the last few months have brought the option. One is how democracy could disappear. And also, this is really relevant to us in the US. We saw what happened in January 2020. And what I want to show, and if you see my slide, this is what is amazing. This is actually the inspiring part. The amazing response of the Israeli public to these activities, to these limitations. What you see there is a mass demonstration of women dressed like Handmaid's Tale. They do it every week for 70 weeks, thousands of Israel. There's 9 or 10 million people in Israel, and 1 to 5% of the people are outside in the streets. Just look at this. And this is an example. This is actually a Twitter feed of all the demonstrations in numerous locations in Israel. People are out every day. So there is something, there's the scary part, but there's also an encouraging part, and also encouraging for people like us who live here, is that actually you can mount civil resistance and slow down things. So it's been 17 weeks, hundreds of thousands demonstrate in the street, 1 to 5% of the population every week. There have been public threats of refusal to serve in reserve duty. As somebody who actually did refuse once an illegal order, I know how hard it is for Israelis and how out of range this is considered. And now you have thousands of people. We had one general strike. There's open opposition to the actions by most leading financial, academic, military, medical, legal figures, including all past security forces leaders, oppose it. Coalition politicians are constantly pestered. When Netanyahu visited the cities in the US, in the UK and France, there were demonstrations, and there's the overseas demonstrations, and you can see sort of the music, the noise. It's really exciting. And of course, you can see the photo also of our small group that demonstrates every Sunday in front of Sterling Hall. So why are they demonstrating? So this is the Israeli newest government. It was sworn in December this year. In the government, we have 3 members with past convictions for corruption, violence, and incitement. 2 of them actually hold security roles, which is unprecedented in Israel. We have 2 members with current indictments, basically investigations for corruption. And it's based on a coalition of 64 members comprised of Likud, which is a right-wing party, the religious Zionists, which represent the settlers, mostly the West Bank population, Jewish population, Otzma Yehudit, which is basically a Jewish supremacist group. This is like if you put Proud Boys in the cabinet. United Torah, which is Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, Shas, which is Sephardi Orthodox, and then Noam, which is extreme fundamentalist and homophobic. So really a recipe for disaster. The first thing they offered was basically a judicial reform revolution. One thing they wanted is to change the way judges are selected. Israel does not have a constitution. That means that all laws are dictated by the parliament, by the Knesset, but are prone to what are called basic laws, a set of certain laws that have been legislated over the years and approved by the Supreme Court. The way the Supreme Court is selected in Israel is basically sort of a relatively professional way, which is you have serving judges, the Israeli Bar Association, Knesset members, and also government officials that select the judges. It's a relatively balanced process. And the idea was to shift and allow the government to appoint the judges, and especially the Supreme Court and its president that dictates the agenda. The other thing was elimination of judicial review. So basically the override law, basically giving the Knesset the power to override Supreme Court rulings. Basically, everything that the Supreme Court would say, the Knesset with a simple majority could eliminate. Eliminating of the reasonability clause. So there is a term in law that when the government does something, it has to be reasonable and based on precedents and on justification, and courts could argue this. So basically diminishing the ability of courts to conduct judicial review of basic laws, elimination of the ability to review what's called reasonables. Explicit legislation against the Supreme Court's exercise of judicial review of laws and requiring a full bench, basically putting a lot of rules and regulation to make a decision that criticizes the government impossible, and ban review of government appointments of ministers. That means that there's no process for appointment of ministers in Israel like in other ones. We only have one house. We don't have two houses of Congress. There's no appointment. And then changing the statute of legal advisor to the government ministry for making the legal advice and bounding into recommendations and make them employees of this ministry they work in instead of the Department of Justice. Then there's a bunch of additional laws. One is basically there is an Israeli law that's supposed to protect the country from having criminal leadership. And basically it says that the Attorney General can declare the Prime Minister or other ministers temporarily or permanently incapacitated if they're under a criminal investigation which is impaired by their conduct. This was ruled now and moved to the government, so basically gone. There's an amendment to the law of public service law that would allow government officials to get gifts. This is specifically aimed to target Netanyahu's habit of actually getting gifts. This is one of the reasons that he's investigated now, because he was getting bribes. Providing this police secretary direct authority of the activity of the police instead of being the professional bull. So think about it, if if somebody at the White House could call a local police agency and have them investigate me or you because they don't like us. Numerous bills limiting the ability to call on non-confidence votes, other methods for dissolving Knesset, as well as prolonging the term of the Knesset. There was a bill trying to prolong the time to 5 years instead of 4. Prohibiting criminal proceedings against sitting leaders, and then a lot of religious legislation. I think that ties into part of the theme of this revolution, which is basically the Iranization of Israel. So expansion of authorities of the rabbinical courts, the sort of the Jewish religious courts, force organizations to enforce religious practices like hospitals or other organizations, amending the law prohibiting discrimination to allow gender segregation and discrimination on the grounds of religious beliefs, expand funding for religious causes, and of course, exemption for conscription for those going to study religious studies in ultra-Orthodox institutions. I know that this is a lot of information and a lot of detail, but what I want you to take is basically the massivity and the totality of all of it. The QR code here, if you want to raise your phone, is actually sort of the scholarly legal opinion about all these laws. And there's actually a lot of details there if anybody wants to see it. And this meeting is recorded. What are the causes of the legislative coups? They're really simple, actually. So those who did the religious said they want to govern better. But the truth is there's two very explicit things. One is what everybody knows. The urgency of these laws is because the current prime minister has been under significant investigations, and he wants to basically neuter the legal system so that the investigation and the trial that is against him doesn't end. And if it ends and he's found guilty, this doesn't prevent him from staying prime minister. The second is that there is a feeling among Orthodox religious parties that they could get even more resources than what they've been getting now. That's a huge opportunity. And in some ways, some of the legislative barriers hurt them. The less apparent, but most ominous, is actually this effort to turn Israel into a state governed by religious laws. And this is going to be the topic of the next talk by Yair. This is really impressive. The idea of creating Israel into a hijab-less Iran, I think is a threat. Reminding you everything is dark, the people's power is actually very impressive in Israel, and you can see that public resistance work, but still important to recognize that we're dealing with a real risk. So our next speaker is Yair Nehorai, and he's an interesting person to get to know and to listen to, because he's actually a product of the religious education system. He's a human rights lawyer and a partner in the legal defense team combating the legislative coup. In recent years, he's been focused on unveiling the messianic undercurrent within the state of Israel. He has a book that came out, The Third Revolution, released about a year ago, sparked a lot of both curiosity and alarm because it really provides the details and the concrete tactics employed by the Messianic movement in Israel to instigate a religious revolution in Israel. So in some ways, it's not a legislative revolution, it's a religious revolution. And already based his work on thousands of hours of research and watching lectures by Messianic rabbis, particularly in educational institutions that are funded by the state, intended for young people before going to the army or to soldiers during their service. His unique background allows him to decode the religious terminology employed in these lectures, making it comprehensive to broader public, while uncovering the future objectives of these groups. So Yair will try to outline in around, with actually quotes, we tried to crystallize a talk that could take an hour into around 25 minutes. Take it over here. The podium is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for the compliments. I can only hope that I deserve some of them. To begin with, I would like to say that I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to address you all at this distinguished forum. It's an honor I greatly appreciate. Additionally, I want to say to apologize for my English and hope you will excuse me for using my notes and of course for my exquisite Israeli accent. With your permission, I will get straight to the point due to the time limit. People tend to compare the the regime change in Israel to processes that happened in Poland and Hungary. But I believe that a closer look at the motivation of the main political players who are driving this change, with an emphasis on political players from the religious Zionist party, might lead to the conclusions that Israel is undergoing processes that remind of the Islamization process that occurred in Iran. In reality, we have to say that the regime change will lead to a dictatorship backed by religious political parties and also the religious Zionist party with its divine mission to fulfill the messianic mission, which is which seeks to establish a Jewish state governed by the Torah and spanning the entire biblical land, including, of course, the West Bank. In the next coming minutes, I will try to demonstrate how the Messianic movement spread its ideas, specifically to young individuals, and also how it relates to the various factors in the liberal civil societies that stand in its way to fulfill its dreams, including Judaism, feminism, liberalism, and so on. At this point, I think it's important to note that it's a fact that this regime change was planned for decades by Messianic rabbis who quietly revolutionized study halls, recruiting the young student to the Messianic army. Well, mainly on young young pre-draft students through pre-military academies and also through their yeshivas. Their yeshivas are educational institutions, religious educational institutions where religious soldiers, if they choose to do so, that, study there. I chose to focus on the pre-military academy Bnei David in Eli to demonstrate how the Messianic movement spread its ideas for several reasons. First, it's a pre-academy, it's a pre-military academy, so therefore its aim is to train, prepare a young student to the role as soldiers, leaders, and citizens of the country. Second of all, I wanted to show how all the Messianic ideas are taught under one roof. Thirdly, because the state of Israel annually all cuts around 10 million shekels of taxpayers' money into funds to support Bnei David. Fourthly, because the founder and leader of Bnei David, Rabbi Eli Sadan, is the recipient of the prestigious Israel Prize, and also because Bnei David is considered a cornerstone educational institution of the religious Zionist movement. But I think the most important issue is that those messianic principles that are being taught in Bnei David are also taught in various forms, depend of course on the rabbis and their personal behavior and the character, but they are taught in other educational institutions of the Messianic movement, and they are also the principles, Messianic principles that guide members of the political religious Zionist party, whom, as we know, currently hold the treasury and the internal security portfolios of the state of Israel, and are heavily involved in the attempt to change the regime. In other words, the Messianic principles that I'm going to talk with you about in the next few minutes, well, they are taught with the permission, with the authority, and with the funding. And it's important to remember, though, with the permission, authority, and funding of the state of Israel as part of training young individuals, as I said before, to the role as soldiers, leaders, and and citizens of the state. Before I start, I think it's important to remind us that the Messianic vision seeks to establish a Jewish state governed by the Torah and spanning the entire biblical land, including, of course, the West Bank. I think it will be only natural if we would start our demonstration by the way Messianic rabbis in Bnei David teach their students, well, 17 and a half, 18 years old, because they are pre-draft students, to look upon democracy. And I will quote now what Rabbi Eli Sadan is teaching, and I will remind us all that Rabbi Eli Sadan is the leader and founder of Bnei David, and like I said before, he is a recipient of the prestigious Israeli Prize, and I am quoting Eli Sadan. Religious Zionism is a huge innovation. Our mission is to say that the Torah is the constitution of the state. His partner in the leadership of Bnei David, Rabbi Yigal Levitstein, teaches that Judaism and religious Zionism are the greatest enemies of the liberal state. And he explains to his students why they are the greatest enemies of the liberal state, because the right to religious freedom in the public sphere is one of the cornerstones of liberalism. And as we say, the Messianic mission seeks to impose the Torah as the constitution of the state and therefore on the public sphere. Let's move on quickly because due to the limited time, I'm moving quickly from one demonstration to another. Let's move on toward attitude toward secularists. Rabbi Sadan, how much does it really hurt us that such large parts of the people of Israel do not believe and do not fulfill the Torah and commandments, how much do we feel and understand that it is really a knife in the back of the nation? I think it should not be overlooked that the Nazis used this expression, a knife in the back of the nation, to point to the betrayal of the Jews. Again, I must say that from a messianic point of view, his words make sense, since the secular person and secularism in general interfere, like we said, in the imposition of the Torah as the constitution of the state. Let's move on to attitude toward left and lefties, and this is how Sadan, again, I'm staying with him, he is the leader and the founder of Bnei David. This is how Sadan teaches his student about people of left-wing views, and I quote, "They have fatal disease in their brain," and he explains what is this fatal disease in the brain. They have completely disconnected from the Jewish people, from the Jewish tradition, from the Jewish faith, and from the Bible. In another lesson, he teaches that the Israeli left cooperates with the Arab against the state, and I think we believe we all understand the meaning of his word, or I might say the accusation that hides behind the word cooperates with the Arab against the state. Anyway, again, from a messianic point of view, we must say that his word makes sense, since the secular leftist Jews interferes with the realization of the vision of the messianic vision twice. Once, like we said earlier, for being secular, and one for the sake of the wholeness of the land of Israel. And by that, as we said again, I will remind us that the messianic vision seeks to conquer the entire biblical land. Let's move on to Judaism. Rabbi Sadan asserts that only Judaism, that only Orthodoxy is Judaism, and all other are cultural streams within Judaism. They are not Judaism. He also teaches that Jews who belong to, and I quote, Reform, conservative, and also assimilates with them, are Jews who spread poison. And he explains why they are Jews who spread poison, because like Christians, they have abandoned the practical commandments and adopted the morality of the prophets, and that separation is what underlines anti-Semitism. Now let's hear it in Sadan words what he thinks, what he teaches about liberal Judaism, and I quote: "When this superficial spirit, this weak spirit from the source of Christianity, which has inflated us, tries to flatten this great face, it is essentially endangering the existence of the nations. It's a venomous snake that many of its carriers don't even understand what poisons they are carrying in their mouths. They, in the scattiness of their education and knowledge, carry this poison within them. And as a conclusion, in the end, this disease is harming the very existence of the nation." I must say that every one of us, I believe, is choosing the words that which with them he prefers to deliver his messages. And it's Rabbi Sadan's choice to use the word venomous snake, poison, disease, and so on. Let's move now to Rabbi Eliezer Kashtiel. He's the head of the yeshiva for graduate. Also, he has to say, also he has an education about reform. And he educates that the desire of the reform movement to pray in the Western world is nothing less than wickedness, cynicism of the lowest kind, extreme dishonesty. Also, he teaches that reform is worse than non-Jewish. It's anti-Zionist, anti-national. He teaches also that participating in a reform wedding is like a treason. and participating in a prayer is an anti-Zionist move. Sadan partners in the leadership of Bnei David, his name is Siegal Levinstein, as we said earlier. He declares that the reform movement is not a stream within Judaism, it's a stream within Christianity. So I guess it's only natural that we will now hear what they teach about Christianity. And I am quoting Kashtir, and I remind you that Rabbi Kashtir is the head of the yeshiva for graduates. And that's what he has to say to teach about Christianity. And I quote, "We know that it," meaning Christianity, "only added filth to the world. It's one big sour." Rabbi Kook, well, he means Rav Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook, the rabbi whom they see themselves as his successors. Anyway, Rabbi Kashtir tells his students, Rabbi Kook writes in several places that all Christianity is one big filth. And also he adds that the Talmud teaches that the end of that person, he doesn't use the word Jesus because it's not allowed. He is saying that man. So he said the end of that man, Jesus, will be in hell in a boiling experiment. It's filth. He keeps on saying that Christianity brought immense filth to the world. It's impossible to describe how much filth, even to this day. It's a disgrace for the human race. And then he asks, how does the human race still allow this place for this terrible damage? Again, from a Messianic point of view, we have to understand it does make sense because, like we said earlier, Christianity abandoned the particular as a practical commandment and adopted the morality of the prophet, and that separation is what underlines anti-Semitism. Let's move on to occupation. Rabbi Eliezer Kashtir, and I quote, "Yes, we are racist. Certainly, we believe in racism. Right, there are such nations around us with genetic problem. They don't know how to run a country. They don't know how to do anything. So he has suggestions for those nations around us that have a genetic problem. And he suggests to them, come be my slave, see what life you will have, what a spiritual and moral level." And he concludes, the occupation only did them good. Well, I guess it's hard not to interpret his words any other way except to say that the occupation is justified because the Jewish race is doing a favor for the Arab race that it is conquering. Let's move on to attitude toward Israel Defense Force. We'll stay with Rabbi Kashtir. I remind you, he is the head of the yeshiva for graduates, and he teaches the main purpose of the state and the main value of the IDF is as an occupying army. It is an army of occupation. Well, it's not Israel Defense Army, it is Israel Occupation Army. Again, we have to say that from a Messianic point of view, his words make sense since the IDF is the army of the Jewish state, not of the Israel. The army of the Jewish state, and which operates to advance the will of God. We'll move on toward attitude toward women and feminism. Sadan, the greatest crime that modern feminism creates in society is the education of women to be independent and not dependent on their husband. And then he adds, it castrates, well, like I said before, I think we have to think about the word he chooses to deliver his ideas. And I quote him, it castrates their ability to be good woman and good mother. This is a disaster. This is tragedy. Another rabbi in Bnei David, his name is Rabbi Yosef Kellner, teaches, well, he said there are CEOs here and there, right? He asks his students and answer such girly as well. You have to understand that in Hebrew, what he said is that it's a combination between a gorilla and a girl. And what he really means is that a woman who is doing a man's job, of course, from his point of view, everything's okay? I'm okay?
Yeah.
What he meant that from his point of view, a woman who is doing a man's job, from his point of view, is losing her femininity. Well, at this point, it's important to say that Sadan declares that it does not agree with Kellner's words, but that doesn't interrupt him from broadcasting Kellner's words on the website of the academy as we speak now. Kellner also teaches that women's spiritual capacity is limited. They have mediocre spirituality. Anyway, again, from a messianic point of view, both the rabbi's words make sense since they seek to preserve the traditional family structure and the role of the woman as mothers and partners. Let's move on to attitude towards women's service in the IDF. Kellner, and I quote, "They cause lower level of security in the IDF. We don't need all this prostitution under the title of girl in the IDF." I think there is no question that this educational rabbi makes a connection between prostitution and women's service in the military, and we cannot forget the fact that those words are being taught in a pre-military academy. Let's now move on to attitude towards the LGBTQ community. Kellner, and I quote, "A person who was born, God forbid, with these perverted tendencies, these deviations, this sexual deviant, this is an illness. These people are sick, mentally ill." Yes, he's not alone. Rabbi Igal Levinstein, as we said earlier, is the head of the pre-military academy. Well, he declares, "I call them deviants." Again, from a messianic point of view, there is a logic in what they are saying, because like feminism, also the LGBTQ community threatens the sanctity of the traditional family. Let's now move on toward attitude toward the Holocaust. And here I have to say, from a personal point of view, that I find those words hard to read every time I read it, and I read them. My father, he died 2 years ago. He was a Holocaust survivor. Anyway, Rabbi Redler does not justify Hitler's action, but does justify his mission, and I quote, "Hitler," that's his word, "Hitler is the most righteous person there is, except he is on the wrong side. The Jews are indeed Israel's enemies." Redler explains to his students that the Holocaust is not really about killing the Jews, and I quote, "That is standard." And he adds, "The general rule is that the Jews are killed all the time outside the land of Israel. That is the rule. That is the standard. That is how it should be. That is how it should be." Well, the Holocaust, according to Rabbi Redler, is therefore the result of the real Holocaust, that it is the refusal of the Jewish people to hear God's voice and immigrate to Israel. That is the real Holocaust from the side of the Jewish, but from the side of the non-Jewish, it is the neglect of the absolute divine morality, and in his words, the all secular culture. Now, again, from a messianic point of view, his words make sense, since the Holocaust is the divine proof for the vision of the Jewish state, whose constitution is the Torah. And we'll now move on to the last demonstration, which is culture, attitude toward culture. We go back to Rabbi Castiel, and he said he teaches that all of Western culture, all of Western culture is built on imagination, and it is filthy, dark, impure, terrible. There is not a drop of truth in it. It is an impurity, it's a pollution, it's foolishness, darkness. Well, again, from a messianic perspective, his voice makes makes sense since they reflect a conservative, ultra-Orthodox worldview. Where I will sum up my words and say that what I tried to demonstrate here with a very short time, that the Messianic doctrine, as mentioned, teaches a solidifying worldview built on an aspiration to lead the state of Israel on a path that ultimately result in a state governed by a religious law in one form or another. And as I opened my remarks, this process, that rather than resembling Poland or Holland, are more reminiscent of Iran. It seems to me that this worldview has a potential to raise concern among the global Jewish community that seeks to see Israel as their home, but also among the nations of the world and the United States in particular, since God becomes a central ally of Israel, with all the implications that come with it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Yair. Again, just a reminder, the people you heard are actually the teachers of people who are ministers, secretaries, and legal leaders of the current revolution in Israel. So our next speaker, summarizing and then opening for the discussion, is Elitzur Siegal. Elitzur, you ready?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll try to summarize everything that was said and somehow in a more, to try to put everything together, to give the whole picture together. Again, just a word about myself. I'm a professor at the Hebrew University of Linguistics. This year, I'm a visiting professor here at Yale. And I'm also an activist. I will tell you a few things that I did in the past and in what way I'm involved in this and in other fights for I don't want to say democracy, for liberalism in Israel. I think that's because part of the issue here is what is democracy. So I will try to do it very quick, very brief, and in a systematic way, basically dividing to try to understand what is happening now. And I think in a way, Naftali explained what is happening in more details, and Yair tried to give the ideology, and I kind of want to bring those things together in in the sense of how everything is connected now. And then to move to basically what we're afraid of, like why this is really becoming real and concrete, and basically to summarize the details that Naftali mentioned before, and also why I think the exhibition of it when Michal presented the life that we're living in. But on the other hand, I think there is some hope, or at least there is much discussion now about what is the future that we would like to see and what we're aiming to. And I think this is part of what is happening now, that new coalitions are actually built now in Israel, and people have the courage to actually come back and dream about our future, even if it's part of our battle. So when we say what is happening, I think basically there is a very simple answer that what's happening now in Israel is part of what we see all over the world of populist government, of populism. And it actually has all the characters of populism that you saw here with Trump, people see in Hungary, in other countries. It's actually quite amazing how there is like a recipe to a populist government, and it's just happening exactly following line by line of the recipe of what populist movement does. basically, and this is, I think, summarize a lot of what Yair just spoke about, there is this notion of the people. And in order to be the people, you need the other, and this is the others are clearly in Israel. There is a clear other, which is the Arabs, in racism and laws of racism that we will talk about them in a few seconds. And when there was this situation, a year ago when there was a situation in Ukraine, the only country that blocked, gave very little numbers of refugees to allow to come to Israel, to its area was Israel. And now we hear more and more talks about Russian immigrants, that we want only the real Jews, not the ones that are just descendants, not the ones that are not feeling that their parents are not Jews. So this is something that actually the current government wants to change. Who can come back? Who can immigrate to Israel? And always this notion comes law and order, that because of the Arabs, there are problems with law and order. We need government. This is how the supremacist party got its power. It got a lot of votes from the south of Israel, where there is tension with Arabs. So this is actually part of the recipe that we see all over. And then there's this imagination of the will of the people. And this is the idea of the real democracy. Now, basically, what the government says, that they want to actually have government. They want to have a real democracy. The Supreme Court is not a representation of the will of the people. They have the majority. Therefore, they can pass any law they want, and there should no any check and balance from the Supreme Court. And it comes, what is the real democracy? So here's where it comes, the idea of conservatism in the big C versus liberalism, emphasis on religion, on tradition. So all these things are basically, as opposed to democracy that also keep the rights of minorities, no, this is not what we need. We need the real desire of the nation, of the people. And this is again a regular recipe for populists. And then there is also a fight against the elites. So there is a real people versus elites who represent the prior regime. And we will see in a second, this has to do with academia, with science, with ideology that reflects science. So we don't want the elites to govern anymore. We don't want, and there is this idea that they represent the real people who don't have the chance to become professors in the university, who do not have the chance to go to the elite units in the army, based on nothing. But basically, they have the story that they will represent the people in the periphery. They will take care of them, even though, as I will say in a second, those people did nothing to the people from the periphery. They did nothing to the lower class of Israel. In fact, they are against helping them. So we will see, this is part of the big picture. And I just want to give you a quote from, again, just to give you a sense. Last Thursday, there was a rally of the government for the government. And this is what the Justice Minister, Yariv Levin, who is behind this judicial revolution, he said, I believe that it is possible to agree that the time has come for the court that will not grant rights to the families of terrorists, that will not allow the holding of fake memorial ceremonies together with supporters of terrorism. What's the story? There was this demonstration of people who died, of victims of terrorism from both sides, Palestinian and Jews, and the Supreme Court allowed it to happen. So all the Arabs, even people who are for peace, are actually terrorists. Join us so that we will have a court that tries rape and does not make it easy for them. What are the rapes? Why they care about rapes? There was one case of an Arab who raped someone, and basically he was treated in the same way that anyone else was treated. that protects the elderly in South Tel Aviv and not the infiltrators, refugees who harm them, and protests. So basically, this is again against refugees who came to Israel based on UN agreements. This is how exactly, and this is how he justifies now the change in the legal system. This is the classical language of a populist government. You can translate to Hungarian, it will sound perfect. You can translate to English with a certain accent, it will sound perfect, because this is a recipe of populist government. So now, what we are worried about, what might be next? Basically, Israel passed a law of the National Basic Law, which basically has a very simple idea. This is the nation of the Jews. It has the idea that until 4 years ago, Israel has 3 languages, national languages, Hebrew, English, and Arabic. Now only Hebrew. The idea was very simple. The people who stand behind this law actually wrote explicitly to make it clear that there are 2 types of citizens. One is superior and one is inferior. Superior, the Jews who speak Hebrew. The inferior are the Arabs. Now, when we applied, and I was part of a group that appealed to the Supreme Court to annul this law, the Supreme Court said, well, it's not so nice, but it's not an operative law. Today, in the government, there was a discussion to make sure that this will be a law that will guide all governments' decisions. If this is the case, starting from next year, there can be discrimination about who can live in which cities in Israel. That's part of actually what this law says. If you understand it in a certain way, next year, this will be legitimate. It will be legitimate to give more money to Jewish education than to other education in Israel. So these are things that can become actually imperative if those changes happen. Academia. This is the sign of our demonstration, no academia without democracy. I want to again give you a sentence from our justice minister on March 3rd on TV in front of the entire nation. He said the following: if we succeed in changing judicial system, we will also change the academy. There is a very clear idea here that they have to fix the academy. The academy is too liberal. The academy is too free. It has to. And next day, what we will see is the limitation of budgets for research. They actually said it explicitly. They want to annul tenure for faculty in the universities. All of those things are not like imagination that we have. They actually say it quite explicit, quite clear. Media at 8 o'clock when everyone can hear that. Shit laws to make sure that only pure Jews can become citizens of Israel, not allowing any Arab family to unite. This is something that is actually going to be there. More power to religious court. This is why you saw this picture of the Handmaid's Tale, because this is what they want to do, to actually give more power to religious court, that they will have the full power on the marital laws. So these are things that we're not imagining. These are things that can happen in the coming year, and they're actually working on it. Discrimination against LGBTQ. Basically, there was a whole debate about when someone gives donate blood, whether on the form there will be father and mother, or whether it will be 2 parents, and it's going to be a law that only father and mother can be on the forms, and many other things. Who can adopt kids? At the moment, there is an open discussion, an open case in the Supreme Court, and they want to make it a law that only family who have a father and a mother can adopt kids. And the real thing is that they actually don't care about the periphery. They don't care about lower class in Israel. In fact, they are against social assistance. They against any help to people who are poor. So this is actually part because they adopt a conservative approach theories from the US as is. And this is what we inherit from them. So this is the concern, this is the worry, these are the real thing, and they're all connected to the populist agenda. And you can imagine how to continue. But I want to say actually that on the other hand, the fight back actually creates new coalitions. And I want to actually to say something about it, and maybe something about activities that I was involved in. So I do want to end with hope. And the idea, what I want to emphasize is that basically the way we see it, and this is a summary, that it's not intended, what the government is now doing is not intended to improve the situation in the state of the citizen and the resident of Israel. They just want to narrowing of the democratic space and the expansion of violence and oppression, and it will create social inequality, will silence the educational and the critical discourse, and will harm the possibility of fighting injustice on the part of the government. And back in 2018, I was part of the Mizrahi Civic Collective that we basically appealed against the Supreme Court, against the National Basic Law. And we want to clarify something. We support now the Supreme Court, not because we agree with its past decisions. An independent Supreme Court is only a necessary condition for a moral country, but not a sufficient one. As a matter of fact, our Supreme Court was the one who actually allowed the occupation, and we have to end the occupation. So this is part of our desire here, is to keep the option, to keep the possibility that one day our country will become a justice country. At the moment we are not. At the moment we gave up because of pragmatic reason, but when we fight for the Supreme Court, it's not because we agree with the Supreme Court, it's because this is the only way that it will be an option to heal our country. Also, we need to annul the National Basic Law. This is something that should disappear from our legal system. At the moment, we have a racist law that basically declares that Israel has two levels of citizenship. We need to fight against inequality before the law. And this is part of the fact that in Israel, there was inequality in Israel. People in different areas of Israel were treated differently. We have to fight against discrimination against Arabs and against Jews from different areas of the world. There was an injustice in Israel. Sephardic Jews were not treated in the same way as Ashkenazic ones. People from the East, Yemen, and the Balkans were not treated in a justice way. And part of what we want to do now is to heal, is to correct, is to have a better future for Israel. And in general, when we speak about the history of the Jews, often it's a very narrow history. And there is a need to fight for Sephardic struggle for recognition. This is part of the healing process that we need to actually hope to have a clear vision of what we're looking for. And basically, this is the time to actually write the constitution for Israel. And I think more and more we see now an attempt to go back to the Declaration of Independence. It's not the ideal text, but it's going in the right direction for a moral country, for a justice country. At least this is the goals of this country. So going back, I think to summarize, something is happening now. Our fear from populist governments were real, and now we have a government that has no internal opposition to this movement. And we see that they're aiming to change. They have actually a plan how to actually make this populist agenda real. But at the same time, we have to fight to stop it. But if we will succeed in stopping it, we have to write our constitution or our dreams for what will be next and how to heal. This is it. I am done.
So thank you so much to all the presenters. It's given a lot of food for thought here. There's a question: will pursuit of equality inevitably lead to the end of Israel as a Jewish state? And is that a desirable result? So if I could add to that, the trends towards family size among the liberal population and the ultra-Orthodox population are very different. So what will Israel look like in 25 years? So I know those are kind of global questions, but would you like to take a shot at that, Elitzur, in 1 or 2 minutes?
So we have the demographic issue, and I think that's very clear now that there's nothing we can do about it, and this is it. This is reality. But part of the notion of social contract is that we decide what is the basic of our country, and the agreement of us as a nation to be part of a government of a society is based on certain values, and I think this is exactly what is happening now. We stop and we say, okay, we have conditions to be part of it. And what the other part of the demographic issue is that there is a certain group that actually support the economy, or the economy relies on them. And this is part of what is happening, the negotiation now. If you want that we will all stay in the same country, we have to go to the basic issues of our social contract. If not, this is what Michal said, we will leave. We will all leave the country of Israel. If you are not agreeing to make sure that this remains a liberal country with real values of democracy, that will be the end. And I think this is exactly what we are saying now in a very clear voice, that if those laws will pass, we do not see ourselves anymore part of this social contract. And that will be the end.
Can I offer a different perspective for
Yes,
a second?
Please.
So a lot of people speak about the demographic threat. I actually consider the term, the demographic threat, a racist term, because it assumes that people, when they're born, have a certain political attribute. Now, we all know we had parents that were racist, we had parents that were religious, or sometimes we had parents that were more liberal than us. People change. I think the main issue, and this is true for the US as it is for Israel or for any other country, is creating a stable framework for democracy in a plural society. Because then everything goes towards the middle in the end. So those who come from more conservative families turn liberal in the other way. And we've seen it over the last 120 years in every country. Like many of our generation, their parents had racist views against definitely homophobic view and racist views. This has changed. So I think that the demographic threat is really something we should resist because it implies something that is inherent by birth, which is if we change education, we change environment, we change infrastructures, things will change.
So there was another question.
Wait, I want to jump in too.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I agree that the term demographic might be conceived as racist, but I kind of disagree a little also, because it's true that we had parents that are different from us, and people change. But one key ingredient into change is the ability to have knowledge and to have education and to have access to that. If you don't live in a liberal society that allows that, the possibility of change is very limited. And once we're limiting the possibility of these demographics to change or to learn and to have access to that, then we have a problem that starts at home. And we have to consider that. It's not because we're saying a person is born a certain way and he can't change. That's not what we're saying. We're saying the way Israel is built now and is going to get more and more like that, limits the ability. And now, the New York Times expose of what's happening in New York suggests that there are similar problems in the States as well. But if there's certain communities that limit at home, from birth, your ability to change, your ability to be exposed to liberal, ideas or knowledge or anything, that's where the problem of demographics starts being problematic, because then you're stuck wherever you were born. And that's a problem that we in Israel have to deal with. And I think I join with Elitzur by saying what we're fighting for now is having a liberal framework that allows people wherever they're born access and defenses, right? That, the people who are hurt, the first and foremost, and that's the irony of it, the Supreme Court protects the weak in the society, including Haredi women, Orthodox women who get divorced and get, all their rights are taken from them. They're the people who are part of our demographic problem, right? But the Supreme Court is here to help them and support them and defend them. Or if the Supreme Court will force the government to allow education open to all, with basic mathematics and English to all schools that want to be funded. That will allow the demographic problem to be a different one, but it's not what we're talking about now. And this is why it's not racist. We're trying to create a country that will allow where you're born not to dictate where you'll end up being. And I think that's important to make that distinction.
So is Israel a Jewish state, and should it stay that way? And what does it mean to be a Jewish state?
Who are you referring the question to?
Well, you can take it if you like. I mean, I hear a defense of liberalism and education, etc. But is Israel a Jewish state? What does that mean, and should it be?
So I think I'm in a unique position to answer that because I deal with Jewish studies. That's what I do. I study those texts that we're talking about when we're saying a Jewish state. That's what I'm studying. My field of study is the Babylonian Talmud, which is considered the sacred text for Judaism from the 11th century on. In fact, I live in a country, Israel is a country where certain parts of the laws in the country are governed by this 11th century, text that was considered a canon. It's actually created in the 5th, 6th century. And we have divorce laws that treat women by laws dictated by men that lived 1,500 years ago. This is a real living issue that I'm studying and learning. And I love those texts. And I do my work. I have some of my students here in the crowd. I see that join my classes. And I love those texts. And I think they're wonderful, but they were right for their time, and they were written in a specific context. And it's a problem. So what do we say when we say a Jewish state? I think that should be a choice to create together from all parts of the society a definition of what being Jewish means. It's not something that needs to be dictated by the sources, regardless of what we think of them. We did this many times. For example, the laws in the Torah say that a Jew should be stoned if he operates machinery on Shabbat, if he works on Shabbat. We've all decided we're not going to follow that one, and we're fine with Jews not doing that. Why are we choosing not to do that in other issues, in some issues, and on others, right? So there's definitely a choice to be made by deciding what being Jewish means. And you know who knew that first and foremost? The rabbis themselves. Rabbinic literature is multivocal. It has many opinions, side by side, all appearing in the text. That's why they're so fun to read, because they already back then created a culture that's multivocal, that's ontological in nature, that has many traditions side by side. So being Jewish, there's not one way to be Jewish. There's many, many ways. And there always has been. So now we have to think together what works, and I think what works with liberalism as well. And that's what a Jewish state should be.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit even more complicated because at least 25% of the people who are citizens of that country are not Jewish. So I think this will be a decision of the citizens of that place in the future. I think moving away from a Jewish state into a state for the Jews would be a way to go. The original book that predicted Israel was called Judenstaat by Herzl. Judenstaat was the state of the Jews. And actually, when he describes the religious content of that state, it's not a Jewish state, it's a place where Jews have self-determination. And I feel that now, 75 years after that state was raised, there's actually a very stable Hebrew identity that is part Muslim, part Christian, and majority Jewish, which could be very secure. I'll say that with a small, asterisk, which I don't live in Israel, so I don't see a way to dictate the people who live there what the country is going to be. But I think the most rational way would be to give the adjective of Jewish state away and make it more as a state in which Jews have self-determination and leadership. I know this would sound a little bit radical, but that's my own feeling.
Well, Michal, let me ask you, is the current process of defining what a Jew is and these, I would say, revolutionary changes that we've been talking about here today, is that not what you're talking about, that it's up to the people to define what a Jewish state is? And it seems as if that's what the ultra-Orthodox are trying to do, and they might be successful, and you don't like that. So how is that process gone awry?
More than that, you can say even, let me take your question and up the ante. More than that, they won 64 mandates. They have the majority, right, theoretically, to define what Jewish means. And that's what they're saying. We have the authority to define now what being Jewish means. And we're using sacred text to do so. For example, let us take that's what they're saying. Let us take the rabbinical courts who only do divorce law, and let's expand their option to deal with other laws as well. Every law could be dealt with in a rabbinic court according to the rabbi's laws. And they say we have the majority to do so. That's true. What happened in Israel, and that's kind of incredible, is that the people, by the way, number-wise, more than the mandate, but that's a different question. But let's say the people who did not win this election rose up and said, the definition that the majority want to enforce on us for what a Jewish state means is unacceptable to us because it contradicts our liberal values. We do not want a Jewish state that contradicts our liberal values. Now, we have a problem. We're not the majority. But the question is that the democracy means that you have the right, the tyranny of the majority, right? You have the right to dictate to everyone else what you want to do in a very, very brutal, forced, one-sided way, very, very fast, or not. And we're trying to fight it. We know we are now in the minority. By the way, this is changing in the polls that are doing. They're saying they were voted to do so. It wasn't exactly true. Doesn't matter. They have the right to do so because they're the majority. But it's a question. Do you define what a Jewish state is based on a slim majority that you won or not? That's the question we're fighting for. And the truth is, knowing that this is the political state, the fact that we have the achievement that we have, 17 weeks in which at least 500,000 people go out every single week to demonstrate in the street, that we manage within 30 minutes to get out of bed when he fired the minister of security. 500,000 people were out in the street within 30 minutes. The fact that we managed to stop the legislation for a while. All of these are achievements that are extremely rare, surprising, and I have to say, makes us feel happy about our ability to do so, but it's still very, very scary. We don't have the power to change if they want to really go ahead and do it. The question is, can we stop them? You're completely right.
Thank you. We're getting towards the end of our time here. There's one other question. Maybe Naftali, you could take this. How will this process that we're seeing in Israel impact relations with the United States and also with American Jews?
Yeah, so as always, it's hard to know, right? And it's hard to predict. And in relationship between the US, between countries, there's basically clear interest, and there's shared interest, there's also shared value. For me, actually, and the reason I thought Yair was important today is because he highlighted the irrational aspect of this revolution. So I think the US, frankly, I hate to say it, but they would live with a less democratic state in Israel as long as it's predictable and as long as it aligned with major values. But what the US would not like is the US is having a rogue nation that has all the US intelligence and military know-how in the Middle East. They have enough of those, right? And I think this is a threat. And I think part of the reason that this current administration is so much involved in what's going on in Israel is because this is actually a threat to American interests. The other side of it, of course, is I think it's a threat to the safety and health of Jewish community. There has been a rise in anti-Semitism, and always Israel was sort of a lightning rod for anti-Semitism. But if Israel becomes this criminal state, that affects literally the perception of every single Jew, regardless if we like it or we don't like it. So I think these are big threats. And in some ways, I almost feel that the images of the demonstrations on campus and other places almost help us to try to mediate that. But if we lose this battle, and people who live in the US who come from Iran or Afghanistan can tell you how they are treated, right? The perception of them is basically coming from rogue nations and enemies. So this is a major threat for the permanence of the American Jewish community, and I think also a big threat to Israel, to American interests in the Middle East and in the world.
Can I add something to this point?
Briefly.
I want to say that in the past, we asked the American to help us. And I was, as a student, I did my PhD here, and there were stages where we asked American to support Israel in the UN, and we asked people to actually call the representative to make sure that Israel will get support and help. And I think we, the Israelis now, are standing in exactly the same position, and we ask you to help us. And in fact, we ask you to call your representative, to ask them to put conditions on their support to Israel, and to make clear that if Israel will stop being a liberal country, if Israel will stop being a democratic country, you will stop the support in Israel. And this is our request from you. If you care about Israel, if you care about the future of the Jewish nation, please do that. This is a moral obligation on your side to help us. In the same way that we asked you in the past, this is exactly the same way that we ask you now. Please act. Please call your representative. Please put a condition on the support in Israel, because we need it. And that's actually one of the things that may save the country of Israel.
Okay. Well, thank you all. It's been shocking and enlightening, and it's always good to learn more. We wish you the best, of course. We hope that Israel stays strong and free and democratic. And we really appreciate your coming today and sharing with the Branford Forum. So thanks everyone for coming. Those of you who are local, we hope to see you next week at the library, including those we consider New Haven local. So thanks very much. Have a good day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank
much.
you.